Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Skees. I'm the Director of Media for TAPS. Thank you for joining us today for this Volleyball 2021 preseason webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but I've got a couple of housekeeping items to address with you first. First and foremost, this webinar is being recorded. That recording will be made available to you later this afternoon or tomorrow morning whenever we get it finished. We have one more webinar after this one today, so it's going to take some time to get these recordings cut together and online. But if you can't find it, just send us an email at the TAPS office and we'll send you the link. It'll also be on our YouTube page. That is youtube.com/tapsbiz. Second, if you have any questions, please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar interface. You'll see that little questions drop down option in that sidebar. Just type your questions in there. We'll get to them as we go. If we don't get to your question right away, don't worry. There is a Q&A session at the end. So if you think of something later or we didn't get to yours right away, we will get to it. But if you run out of time or if your question is just too specific to answer appropriately in this venue, please send us a follow-up email after the webinar or call us at the office and we'll have those numbers ready for you then. With that, I'm joined today by Brian Bunselmeyer, TAPS Executive Director, Robert Huckabee, TAPS Associate Director and Director of Compliance, Steve Prudhomme, TAPS Associate Director, and Will Dixon from the TAPS office. He's helping us out behind the keyboard today. And we're going to get started, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Thank you all for joining us. Love to tell you that COVID's behind us and that it's a distant memory. However, it is raising its head again as we speak. We have TAPS protocols posted on the TAPS website. We're going to get into those as we go forward. We hope most of you have gone through your tryout seasons, have your teams set, and are already beginning play this first week of actual play. We're looking forward to our Spike Down tournament this weekend, and we know there's going to be a lot of volleyball going on across the state. I'm going to jump in here first, and let's just get right to it. Let's go to the TAPS important dates this year, the basics. So August 9th, which was earlier this week, you get your first games, tournaments, and scrimmages. As a reminder, you're allowed 24 games and 3 scrimmages. November 3rd, which is the same date corresponding to last year, will be district certification for all classifications. November 18 through 20 are our championships. Those are posted on the TAPS website. We'll bounce over there a little later today, but the official TAPS calendar, go to taps.biz, click on calendar and scroll across to November and you'll see it. And then the Monday of Thanksgiving, because we're a little late, will be the volleyball all-state selection meeting. So important dates: November 3rd, district certification, the championships as we run through the playoffs, November 18, 19, and 20. We're still working on site locales. We're going back to the Final Four, so we're excited about that, and we'll talk about the playoffs a little bit later as we go. Robert, give us a little talk about the bracket considerations this year versus last year, kind of how we're returning back to our normal process.
Okay, Brian, welcome everyone. We are working on brackets as we speak. We get those out to you by about the first part of September, so in the next couple of weeks we'll have those out and ready to go. We formulate those in the office based on our criteria contained in the bylaws. Last year, with a lot of the COVID situations and teams that did not field teams, had a lot of no contests. We expanded those brackets and brought more teams in than we historically have. This year we're going to return back to normal as best we can, so those brackets will reflect how we've done it more traditionally in the past. Our process includes those being viewed by our AEC and our board, and once both those groups have looked at those and we're comfortable with that, we'll have those out to you probably about the next couple of weeks. About the first week of September, we'll have those brackets out.
So basically the basic frame of the brackets will remain the same, where the champions and runner-ups are set. That's also set in the bylaws as we go forward. And then it's how far down we go. We definitely will not be taking every team this year on the bracket. So if it comes into no contest, we'll talk about playoffs down the road and how that works. We're going to jump on down to rules and governance. Will, if you do me a favor and jump over to the TAPS website, that's www.taps.biz. One of the things that we wanted to go to, let's go ahead and go to athletics and then drop down to volleyball for me. So there were a few changes this year, and we at our summer convention we heard about some of the uniform changes that are in the works for coming. But for right now, if Will covers, you're on the volleyball page at taps.biz, drop down to NFHS, and you've got where to purchase your rule book, whether it's digital or whether it's hard copy, the updates from this year, the 2021-22 rules changes, and then the uniform requirements that are in place right now. So throughout the year, www.taps.biz, click on athletics, and then jump on down to volleyball, and that's how you access your rule books, etc., from the National Federation. We carry the digital ones with us, highly encourage that. If you've got a question for the R1 or the R2, it's always good to have that rule book in hand and say, how is this applied? Or when you ask them what rule they're talking about, always good to be able to understand what rule they're pointing to, and you can see whether it applies or not. At the end of the day, nfhs.org, we do play by the National Federation rules. No other rules would apply. Robert, talk a little bit about the TAPS rules, and then let's jump through that a little bit.
Okay, Will, if you'll hop back over, jump on down to the next one. TAPS basic rules. These apply to our scrimmages, tournaments, and games. If you go to that next slide, those rules are found in our bylaws in Section 190. Those remain in place. Here we're talking about game limitations. That's one of the most important. As Brian mentioned earlier, you have a maximum of 24 games in 3 tournaments. You can trade tournaments for games. There's a formula for that in the rule. You can look at that. If you ever have questions about that, you can reach out to our office and we'll help you work through that. We do not, TAPS does not have a limit of the maximum number of games you can play per day or per week. That's up to your local school control. Obviously, you've got other activities going on at your school in addition to just academics. So that's for your administration to determine if you're playing multiple games or tournaments per day or per week. We limit your maximum per year, but that's up to you to manage at the local school level.
Robert, jump in just a little bit. Every now and then we have those two-way players. They're playing sub-varsity and varsity. If my recollection is correct, you get 6 extra games total, but the tournaments don't change. So if you have a young lady that's playing both JV and varsity, they still get to choose total of 3 tournaments, but you can add 6 more games into their total. Is that correct?
That is correct, and those are spelled out there in 190. If you have any questions, please refer to that. And we always get a few questions each year about that, and we'll help you work through that. We want your athletes to have the opportunity to participate as much as possible, and you to use those athletes between varsity and JV as you can, but we'll help you stay within those limits as well. And as we move to the playoffs, remember, you qualify for the playoffs. You get 1 warm-up game per round of the playoffs. That is still allowed.
Again, just jumping right back to that 24 games in 3 tournaments or the extra 6, those are for regular season. So once you get into the playoffs, you could then call those JV players up, and those games don't count towards the season maximum. Is that correct?
That's correct. These season maximums just apply to the regular season, non-district and district. Once you're in the playoffs, then you're in the playoffs and you proceed accordingly. Well, if we'll jump to that next one, it always is important to talk about eligible opponents. Those are found in Section 138. 138 remains in place. Remember, this is interscholastic competition, so you need to be playing other school-based programs. Homeschool programs are allowed. Affiliated leagues are allowed. What's not allowed are club teams or independent teams. Obviously, that's not interscholastic competition. That's a different dynamic. And then school members, you could have school teams that are members of non-approved leagues. That's spelled out for you in Section 138. If you ever have any question about eligible opponents, I know it is hard sometimes to know particular schools, if it is a school team, what their other league affiliation might be or their independent status. We do know a lot of those, and we know a lot of those, while they do change frequently, we can help you walk through that if you have questions and issues about that.
I want to throw a quick thing in here. Steve, tell us a little bit about the out-of-state teams. If you're hosting a tournament and you have someone from out of state or out of country, or if you are planning to go out of state or out of country, what do they need to do on that side?
Basically, you need to ask permission from the TAPS office. There's a form that's in your coach's toolkit inside of Rank 1. So as you're making those plans and those things are coming together, then that form, that application needs to be sent to the office, and the office will send approval or might ask for additional information. But again, we'd like to know about the contract, all the information, the emails, who you're playing, and then we'll give you some feedback at that point.
So it's important that whether it's an in-state or out-of-state opponent, that we are playing interscholastic competition. On your homeschool programs, it's really important that when you're scheduling homeschool programs, you make sure to mention to them that the HAPS is for 9 through 12. We don't want the overage, and we don't necessarily want the youngsters unless it's a necessity. That's up to them to prove that to you. But you need to ask that question. Try to be as close to our eligibility rules as possible.
All right, back to our official ball. That's also in 138 is the Wilson. The Wilson K1 Gold. Remember, your ball in volleyball has to have colored panels. That is required. You can't have solid white balls. That's not allowed for any games, any TAPS games. This applies to tournaments, non-district, district, postseason contests. You see that pretty red, white, and blue ball. That's what will be used at our Final Four and state tournament. So we know you like to use your school colors. Certainly that's allowed. But if you want to use the same ball we'll be using at the Final Four, it will be that red, white, and blue.
So kind of going back to this little old school, but I remember the discussion, all white balls are not allowed. That was voted on by the AEC and approved by the board. You can use whatever ball you want to warm up in. You can use whatever ball you want in practice, but once the games begin, it needs to be that Wilson K1. It can be whatever tricolored ball you want to use. So, again, we thank you for supporting Wilson because they support us.
And then finally, we move on to game information. This is very important to us here at the TAPS office. Have your schedules completed in Rank 1 and made public, so those populate to the standings. Report your scores, score reporting. I'm going to pass it off to Steve here. He's kind of on top of score reporting here in our office. Talk about Rank 1 and Scoreboard.
Well, right now we're going to be we're getting together with Scoreboard on score reporting. In the short term, you need to get your schedule put into Rank 1. You put your schedule into Rank 1 and everything's going to be okay. We're going to come out with some more information about using Scoreboard along with Rank 1 that should make this process a lot easier. So stay tuned for that and get those schedules into Rank 1.
It's really important in volleyball. We've already started. Some of you played yesterday. Some of you are playing tournaments this weekend with 10 or 12 games coming. You can get behind in a heartbeat. It's kind of like when I was in the classroom. Don't miss those first couple of days of homework assignments and think you're going to make them up the night before the big test. So schedules need to be in Rank 1. Report your scores as you go along. We only require varsity scores and varsity schedules. You can use it for the sub-varsity as well. Steve, we're going to move on from that reporting. Before we go, if you need help in Rank 1, reach out to us. You have Kelly and Rhonda in our office. They will definitely try their best to walk you through, and they can also direct you to where the helpful YouTube and other videos are in Rank 1 and what we have here in the office. So, Steve, we're going to jump out of here, and we're going to jump to officials. Tell us what we need to know about officials for the coming year.
Well, you need to make sure you have some, and we're very appreciative that the officials are out and working and making the sport possible. TAPS has rules on that. You need to look in section 134 regarding officials. TAPS approves all TASO chapters, and then we list on the website under resources. If you go under resources and then you look at chapters, you can go through officials and then go all the way down. There's a list of TAPS approved chapters, and so we've sanctioned those chapters in particular. But if they're not listed on the website and they're not TASO, then they're not okay. And also, when we say that, that means that they're TASO trained or TAPS approved chapter trained, and they're also a member and they're also assigned. So just because they have a patch on their arm does not necessarily mean that they're going to be sanctioned. So make sure that they're working for that chapter and they're under the umbrella of, which goes to all the background checks, the insurance, the training, everything else. So again, it needs to be done very properly. If you have any questions, you can call the office, but also go to the TASO website if you want to know who's in your area.
That's going to be true for tournaments, non-district, district, and playoff games. So, again, we don't want somebody having their officials that they buy a shirt for and they work all their home games. We want to go through the TASO or TAPS-approved chapter and that assigner. When you do that, that also means we're going to use the TAPS-approved pay scale. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct. And also, we urge people to get contracts with these chapters. So to make sure that you understand what the price is going to be, what the process is going to be. And again, as an office, we can help you to enforce contracts. And we'll come in behind and we'll support. So make sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to officials, and make sure that you're getting them the information early. They need to know those schedules. You need to check and make sure that you follow up. And again, if something gets canceled at the last second, especially this year with COVID, anything can happen. Make sure that you're getting that information to them. But we'll go into more detail about that when we get to the COVID guidelines. Also, moving on to the site-based officials, which are basically the ones you arrange at your site. They should not be high school or younger students. We need adults doing the official scorebook, libero tracker, clock operator, line officials, etc. It's not about skill. It's about having someone older out there who can maintain and also make sure that there's a great deal of respect back and forth. But again, get your adults out there, and you better start training them early so you have your games covered. So again, the officials are very important, those that you have site-based and also the chapters you bring in. And again, they need to be treated as guests. So when they arrive, they need to know where they need to be. If there's a dressing room, make sure that they get paid in good order and all of that. And again, just be who you are and show them who you are. And like I said, it'll be a great experience, and we'll keep the officials coming back. Moving on to NFHS rules.
So just as a reminder, we are going to be NFHS rules. We haven't changed. We've been there for a long time. Sometimes coming out of club, we forget that. But we are NFHS rules. You can go to taps.biz, click on athletics, click on volleyball, and then up there in the red menu bar, you'll be able to find that. Those are their uniform rules and regulations. They are shown in there as well. So make sure you're following the NFHS rules. It's extremely important that you look at the changes. There's not many this year, but as you'll know, there are points of emphasis. I think that's going to be a big deal as well. We're going to talk a little bit about how these rules are going to apply with the COVID situation under game circumstances here in just a moment. But again, if you don't have that rule book, please reach out, get with your athletic director, whoever needs to, and let's get those rule books so that we can be up to date on the rules, make sure everybody's following by the same set of rules. Robert, why don't you talk about eligibility of staff and students, and let's just talk about how we establish that and how we go forward.
Sure. All coaches and all participants need to establish their eligibility on a yearly basis. We do that, and we track that through Rank 1. That's our TAPS database. And as we look at beginning with coaches and staff, all high school coaches, that's varsity, sub-varsity, that's head coaches, assistant coaches, anybody working with your students, they need to be in Rank 1. You go in there and create that coach's profile. Once you do that, complete all the pertinent information, give us their cell number and email so that we can reach out and contact them. We have many instances where we're at a championship or an event. We may have weather issues. We may need to get alerts out to people. It helps to have that information in there. We certainly never use it for anything else. Nobody else has access to it. But that information is very helpful to us when we need it. And make sure as you put your coaches in there, put all their roles in there. Many of your coaches, we know, have multiple roles at your school. If you'll put them on there, we're going to talk about communication in a minute. We pull a lot of our communication by sport or activity, and if they're not listed in that particular sport or activity, they're not getting those emails or updates coming from our office. They'll complete their professional acknowledgement of rules. They'll complete all their scope requirements, and they'll go through that process. And when they've done all that correctly, when they pull up their Rank 1, it'll show they're compliant or non-compliant. So that's the first step with regard to our staff. When we look at students, obviously they have a student profile. If they're new to your school, parent will be completing that for the first time. If they are returning to your school, they do update that every year and sign those acknowledgement of rules, upload all their medical information, their medical history and physical. Any school-based forms that you require that you have included in the Rank 1 system, those will be in there and available as well. And then talking about those students that are new to your school, transfers that are coming into your school, they'll have additional requirements for applications and forms that need to be filled out. Same true for international students and students not living with parents. Those are three classes of students that do need to establish eligibility. There is an application form and review process for that.
So Kelly and I pulled up the rosters, and we pulled up the staff profiles today for volleyball. There's still a lot of our schools out there that you may have the kids in, but they're not turning green. They may not have a medical history form up. They may not have completed everything they needed to do. So we definitely need all of our coaches and athletic directors, especially with volleyball already starting. Again, you're establishing the eligibility before they can play. So we want to make really sure that we do have the volleyball girls in. We have the roster built that shows all girls. So when you build that initial roster, it's all the young ladies that are in volleyball, sub-varsity and varsity alike, at the high school level are on that roster because you're certifying them all as eligible to play. And then the red-green eligibility right now, I think the number one thing that's keeping that from happening would be the physical and making sure that those forms get uploaded as well. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to bounce back up just a minute here, Will. We're going to talk about students that are new to your school. So 8th graders that are coming into high school that have not played or participated anywhere else, those students are not subject to the transfer process and the transfer forms. So if they're coming from an 8th grade, regardless of whether it was yours or not, and they're coming into high school, they are not considered transfer students. As you can imagine, right now, with volleyball started, we started sending out transfer forms for district review last week. The young ladies, until they're approved by the TAPS office, if they are a high school student that is transferring to a new school, they must be approved prior to varsity participation. That right now, I know we had a lot of games last night. I know we still have a lot of transfer forms, Robert, sitting around. So talk a little bit, if you would, Robert, about the student transfer form, which they fill out in rank 1, and the difference with that and the PAPF, the previous athletic participation form. Just a basic of what's different and what we need.
Every transfer student, every student that transfers during high school to your school is required to complete a STF, a student transfer form. That is available in rank 1 when the parent goes on and completes the student profile and answers that question that they are a transfer student. It will populate that form for them. They fill that form out online and it's submitted online, and that comes directly to our office. If they participated in any activities during the current or the previous year at their previous school, they're also required to complete a PAPF, a previous athletic participation form. That is also available in rank 1. That's the form that actually has to be completed up on the top section by the parents, the student, and the new school. And then that's sent over to the previous school. They answer a few questions and sign off on it. And then that has to be uploaded, sent to our office. That has to be uploaded in the student file. If you need any help with any of that, reach out to our office. We can help. Once all that information is received, then our office starts the review process.
So, Robert, I'm just going to say it and be the devil's advocate here. Obviously, all I have to do is email it in, and they're going to be approved that day, and I don't have any wait time from the time I submit my form. My PAPF comes in. What's a traditional time limit on that?
Not so fast. Okay, I just explained phase 1. Phase 2 is once we've received it and reviewed it, and everything looks in order, and we don't have any questions, and there's no missing information. The next phase of the process is your district, your volleyball district in this case, everybody in your district receives a transmittal from our office explaining all the transfers in your district and a copy of that PAPF if one is available and was required. Everybody in that district has 2 days. They have 2 business days to ask any questions or raise any objections if there are any. Our office will look into that, determine if there's an eligibility issue. So once everything's in our office and has been reviewed, it goes out to your district. We're getting those out daily. We've already done all the volleyballs that have come into our office. We started with those first because we knew that you guys would be the first ones up playing games. Did the same for fall soccer. We're working on football now. We'll continue to process those on a daily basis, but just know once you've done it on your end and sent it in, there's still going to be 2 or 3 more days there at the fastest before those will be approved in rank 1. And if that's what's keeping a student from going from red to green, once we approve it, then they'll turn green.
Yeah. Also, don't have the parent call the office for the update. Really, we're going to be talking to the school-based personnel on that, and again, that causes the delay as well. So tell them you're taking care of it, and then also send in if you have a question or ask for an update. Send us an email and let us know. But if we have parents asking us, and then it just slows everything down. So again, we're working through the school.
We know how anxious they are to get their young ladies approved for participation, just like coaches and ADs are anxious as well. We can't finish our part of the process until we can get it out to the district. So I dare say we probably have as many volleyball PAPFs missing or additional questions because of the way an answer was received on the student transfer form, and we're working through those. So we are here to help. Email us at info@taps.biz, or feel free to give us a call at the office if there's questions that we can help you walk through. 254-947-9268, 254-947-9268. All right, Will, let's bounce on down a little bit. Let's talk about communication. As you look at the communication, we're going to try really hard to have the volleyball page. It's going to be taps.biz. Click on athletics, click on volleyball. On the right-hand side, you're going to have the volleyball blog. So every time we send an email out, we're also going to post it there. So that volleyball page, bookmark it, go back every now and then as you can. We will use the email accounts shown in rank 1. So if you're using an email that's not school-based or whatever, please make sure that with your athletic director, you have the accurate email in there so that you're receiving those emails. When we send an email to volleyball coaches, we're also including the athletic director, so we've got a double tap on that one. Rank 1, if there's something really important that we need to get out immediately, we'll hit you a push notification which says, hey, you need to go to the TAPS website. There's been an update. And then we use the Twitter, taps.biz, and we also use TAPS Volleyball. So if you're finding things and as you go through and you're posting pictures or whatever, include us. That's TAPS Volleyball for our Twitter account. The TAPS website, we'll jump back there real quick for me if you would. It's www.taps.biz. So if you go to the home page, over there under resources, if you hover over that, the first thing down is bylaws. That may be changing shortly, but for right now, that's the quick way to get to the bylaws. It's a long document, but make sure you get there. And then again, go to athletics. Will for me, and then click on volleyball, and it'll take you to that page over there. So it's all the way down. There you go. Click on volleyball real quick. So games needed shows up there, the approved balls, etc. Everything we have about volleyball. In the green on the right-hand side, you see the TAPS blog, and then you also see the Twitter feed that's going there as well. All right, Robert, let's jump in. Will, drop me back to the PowerPoint. Let's drop down, and let's go to health and safety protocols. I know that's probably preeminent on most folks' minds as this Delta variant brings it back to us. So, again, pregame communication is where we're going to start, Robert. What's going to be required between the host schools and our TAP schools and the officials?
So we're going to move back to something very similar to what we had last year with regard to our pregame communications. This will apply to scrimmages, games, and tournaments. And if we look at that, jump on up to the next one, Will. This applies to all contests, varsity and sub-varsity. Pre-game, prior to the game, the communication between the two schools. Our schools did a great job last year of communicating in advance of contests with regard to protocols. One of the most important of those is communication that everybody is well and safe and able to participate on that particular day. So the teams will affirm to each other as we've done in the past. Brian mentioned our Spike Down tournament coming up this weekend. As our coaches come in, they'll be affirming that their team personnel, their players, everybody is good with COVID. That'll be true for our games that are played throughout the year. So each team will affirm that they're good. The home team will be responsible to affirm that with the officials. What are you affirming? You are affirming that everybody in your group has self-screened for the COVID conditions, that at a minimum they don't have the COVID symptoms, they're not lab confirmed with COVID, nor have they had close contact with anyone who is lab confirmed with COVID. Same thing we did last year with regard to those pre-game affirmations and communications between the schools.
So, Robert, the big thing is that both teams are communicating, and the home team is communicating with the officials that everybody that will be there is symptomology-free and moving forward. And the officials' crew should do the same for you. When they arrive or prior to their arrival, they should certify that they are symptom-free. The situation does occur if it's within 72 hours that the officials, we've talked with TASO and our TAPS-approved chapters, if one of the officials comes down with COVID or is showing those signs, if within 72 hours of the contest, they will notify the home school. The home school will then notify the visiting school, let them know. Then your protocols kick in, but at least that's the notification. Same thing would be true if you played a contest last night and either school has someone on the personnel, whether it be a coach, a trainer, whether it be the table crew, whether it be anybody that would come in contact with each other, that you need to notify that, hey, we have had a positive test or we have a positive case or we have symptoms. So I think the biggest thing there is that we keep communicating between ourselves. That information is very important as to how your protocols from your school kick in. As far as the game concerns, one of the things that we talked about with Tasso this morning, last year we required teams to stay on the same bench. This year we're going back to rules as normal where you switch after each set. If both head coaches determine that they want to stay where they are, then they can inform the up and around the R1 and the R2 that they wish to stay and not move, and that's fine. So we're leaving it between the two teams. If you both agree that you want to change benches, then you change. If either one of you disagrees or neither one of you wants to, then you stay with the old rule where you just move bench to bench. As far as pregame, go ahead and do your pregame just like we've always done. You can wear a mask if you want. It is not a situation that we are going to change. We're going back to the old rules as they used to be. On the flip side to that, post-game is going to be the same way. If you want to shake hands underneath the net like we have in the past, or if you want to come to the line and wave, either way. Some schools are obviously going to be much more concerned than others. It's just the nature of the beast. So your rules for your school, that's what will take precedent. And I think the biggest thing that I can say is just make sure that both coaches know what's going to happen after the game before the game occurs. Again, I think the biggest thing that comes out, and Robert helped me say this better than what's going to come out of my mouth. I apologize, folks. Your school takes care of your school. The visitor, the opponent takes care of their school, and their rules are required. So as far as who can play and who cannot play, Robert, explain how that works on the school-based level.
So how it's going to work on the school-based level is, like Brian mentioned, your school will develop your protocols for your team and for your coaches. The other schools will do the same. While you can let's use masks for an example. Your school could choose to require masks for all your athletes. You cannot require that of your opponent if that's not their protocol. So you cannot impose your guidelines on the other school with regard to the competition. If we talk about home games and facilities, it's your facility, it's your site, you're charged with responsibility to manage that. You could have game maximum fan capacity limitations. You could require things of fans coming to your home facility, and we would honor that. But that would only apply to the fans. That would not apply to the actual participants in the game. If that is the case, that needs to be communicated very clearly to your opponents in all those situations.
So going back to your team, if you feel like your folks on the bench need to wear a mask, we highly encourage that. If you feel like your players on the court need to have a mask, we can highly encourage that because we are supporting your school-based decision-making. However, you cannot require that of your opponent. So your opponent may say, we are not going to wear a mask on the bench and we are not going to wear a mask on the court. So that they are adhering to their school policy while you are requiring your school policy. You can also not require the other team to sign a hold harmless agreement prior to playing. You cannot require them to have immunization. You cannot check to see whether they've had the COVID vaccination, and you cannot require testing before you play on either teams or on the other team. You could require that of your team, but that's what your school is deemed necessary. So, again, School A takes care of School A, School B takes care of School B. If you're hosting the tournament, or if you're hosting the game, you need to make really sure that all of your precautions are known. So one school may require their table crew to wear a mask, one may not. One school may require that their gatekeepers wear a mask. One school, as you're a host, if you're the host and you want to have your gatekeepers and your table crew wear a mask, totally acceptable, and we support that. Where it's going to get a little touchy is on the fan base. So again, what Robert said, if you are going to limit to 2 or 3 per person, or if you're going to limit the crowd size to 100 on each side, please make sure that's readily available to the opponent so that they know exactly what they can and can't bring. If you're going to require masks inside your building, if you're going to require 6 foot of separation like we did last year, totally support that as your school-based decision making. However, you need to make sure your opponents know that. And if you were totally not going to allow fans at all, that, especially in the district side, that really needs to be at the district executive committee this year for volleyball. If you do have COVID restrictions, make sure that you do have a district meeting with either Zoom or in person or whatever you can do to make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is going to do. We would highly recommend in between each game going ahead and sanitizing the balls like we did last year. That's the home game's responsibility, and move on down that road. We'll be trying to do that in our stuff that we're doing at Spike Down this weekend. I know that Tasso has kind of been fluid with this. They're working with the UIL. We're working with the UIL and Tasso to make sure that the officials, Robert and Steve, correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, the officials are not in charge of COVID management. They may report something, but they're not in charge of it. Is that a fair way to say it?
That remains the same. That was the case last year. If they had any concerns that they observed when they were calling a game, they made a note of that. That was sent to their office and to our office for review, and if anything needed to be addressed, we did. But they're there to call the game, and as game administrators of the host facility, you're there to manage the facility.
So from a COVID standpoint, it's not going to be a game point penalty. From the R1 should not assess penalties based on COVID requirements. I do think in talking with Tasso, especially Tasso Volleyball, the one coach, one player, an official situation like we had last year and social distancing, I think it's still in place. So that's where we are right now. Things may change depending on how it gets worse or if it gets worse. So, Robert?
Hey, before we move off of this, Will, would you jump back over to the website? Let's show our listeners where those protocols are found. We published these last week. If you go to the website, there are the resources on the right-hand side up on the top, that COVID-19 information. If you click on that, it'll take you to about a 4 or 5 page document. Those are our COVID protocols as we start the year this year. As we said all last year, and we'll continue to say this year, we are constantly monitoring the situation. We know it's different in different communities around the state. We know there's a lot of struggles going on with who can and who cannot tell people what to do. We're very much aware of that, keeping an eye on that. But just so you know, that's where you can find that information. We've covered a lot here. I know there's a lot to it. Take the time afterwards to go look at that. That's a very helpful resource for you.
I think the biggest thing we can say about COVID is be prepared to change. We're starting as best we can. We're moving forward in a linear pace, so you'll see updates every 2 weeks from us if something changes or if we need to move forward. We'll drop on down to auxiliary groups. So auxiliary groups would be your cheerleaders. Your auxiliary group would be if you had a dance team that was going to perform or anybody that's out there going to do something on an auxiliary, your announcers, etc. Just make sure that you have good policies in place. If you're going to allow the cheerleaders for your school, you need to allow them for the other school if you're the home team. If you're at a neutral site, make sure you both agree what's going to happen. Again, as a host, make sure you're a good host and make sure everybody knows what can and can't happen when they get to your house. I'm going to jump on down to playoff concerns over the protocols. Once we get to the playoffs, it needs to be both schools, and not just agreeing on who the officials are, not just agreeing on the day and the date, but you also need to agree to all the COVID protocols. So, Robert, I know we struggled a little bit with that at times. The home team, if you're hosting it at your house, you definitely need to tell them what your protocols are, but understand that they need to be agreed upon by both teams in the process, correct?
That is correct, and as you search for neutral sites when you get to that point in the playoff, you may have to obviously be very well aware of what that site, the school that owns that facility, what their requirements are. You would need to follow their requirements as well, which might require the two schools to look for multiple sites to find one that's agreeable to the protocols that both schools have in place and the facility that you're using.
So, Steve, as we've begun reaching out, we're already hearing a couple of concerns with maybe the 50% rule going back into effect. So basically, if you're renting from somebody, you're going to have to pay attention to their COVID protocols and make sure you ask and agree up front as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. You don't have a lot of runway. We thought we would be able to lay everything out for the whole year, but we're still in this. So make sure that you keep your options A, B, and C open at all times and communicate with those sites.
By the time you get to the championships, we'll definitely have those considerations out there, but all things are still in play, whether it's mask for fans, mask for teams. The other thing that would be out there potentially is limitations on attendance, whatever. We'll work through those. I don't think it's going to be as locked down as before, but then again, I was really hoping we wouldn't be where we are right now with this Delta variant. So let's talk about stoppage of play in the short term. I don't see it happening. I don't see it TAPS saying no games that we may have to. But remember, Texas is that large state, 800 miles from border to border going north, south, and east and west. You may have something happening out west that's not happening in the east or vice versa. So I don't think that we will have a continued stoppage of play, but we could. And if we do, we'll notify everyone, and it'll just be stop and hold and then move forward. Long-term stoppage of play, we're still planning on to play this thing through and crown champions. If we made it through last year, we're sure looking to make that happen this year. So Robert or Steve, you have anything else on stoppage of play as we're looking for it?
No, we'll just continue to monitor and keep everybody advised.
We're going to jump in and just mention playoff brackets real quick. The playoff brackets, like Robert said, are being developed. We're back to our old ways. 50% is the general rule. Somebody stays home in each district is the general rule. Those brackets will be out as soon as we can. We're presenting them to the Athletic Executive Committee and the board. Those should be up once you review them. I would ask, Robert, you can, and Steve can chime in if you want. I would ask that once we publish the brackets, look at them quickly to see how it looks. If you have any questions, a lot of times what we get are the district certifies and then we get a question. That's 3 or 4 months from now. And to be honest with you, I think most of those appeals at that time, for lack of a better word, appear to be self-serving. So if you're going to look at the brackets when they come out, if you've got questions, please let us know. But again, we're going to go back to the old school way, 50% rule, 50% get in, or a little bit more to fill out a bracket. And there may be more buys this year because last year we took everybody. Robert, talk to us about what happens if a team cannot play a contest or contest based on COVID with a non-district opponent or a tournament.
So any games that can't be played because of COVID concerns, that will be a no contest, just like it was last year. So we'll continue that process. If you have COVID issues, obviously if it's not safe, if your protocols at your school prevent you from playing the game because you're under quarantine, then communicate that as quickly as possible to your opponent. As we move into district games, obviously your districts, if they haven't already, need to meet about the season. Make sure your schedule's good. Last year, I know a lot of our districts had a little flexibility in their schedule. That helped tremendously to change things around if they had to at the last minute, make up some games that needed to be made. So keep an eye on that and just know that as you go through the season and have issues, communicate that to everybody and keep everybody in the loop.
So we would surely encourage, if it's an early district contest and you can reschedule it. TAPS does not have the 2 games a week rule like the UIL schools are kind of saddled with at times. I'm not saying that both schools would agree, but if you can't agree, if you've got a little flexibility, go ahead and reschedule. Reschedule is always best. If it comes down to a no contest, then we need to make sure at the district executive committee meeting prior to the season, not at the end of the season, how those situations will be broken if there's a tie or ranking. So we're here in the office, info@taps.biz, or give us a phone call. But if a team cannot play in a district or a contest, the no contest would apply, and we simply move on if it can't be rescheduled. Robert, that does change once we get to the playoffs.
Once we get to the playoffs, and this is the rule we had in effect last year, and it did affect some teams, and that was unfortunate. But if we get to the playoffs, once we have that, that's already posted with regard to each round of the playoffs. Once we start the playoffs, we've got to have a winner and a loser in each round of the playoffs and move on through that bracket to our championship. By then, our championship site and contracts will be in place. So if a team cannot advance, cannot participate in the playoffs because of COVID, then they're going to need to bow out. If they have a situation where they might be requiring a protocol of their opponent that they expect that other schools are probably not going to agree to, we had those discussions some last year, then at the beginning of the playoffs, that's going to be a problem. They're going to need to bow out of the playoffs. If they're going to have some protocols and things in place that exceed our minimum requirements that would then force their opponent to have a difficult situation that they would not be required to agree to. So when we get to the playoffs, we've got to have a winner and loser in each round. We've got to move through. If you get into the playoffs, even deep in the playoffs, and COVID jumps up and your team can't advance, then you're going to need to bow out at that point.
So we've done a lot of talk about COVID, but there are other environmental factors out there. My daughter's up in the panhandle of Florida, and Tropical Storm Fred, which may become Hurricane Fred, is looking to bear down on Pensacola and Mobile here later this week and into the weekend. Robert, what do we have in place in the event bad weather? Like last year, we had some horrific storms that came through. How are we going to apply that same contest, no contest, or whatever? How would we look at that?
We'll look at that very similarly. If we have natural disasters, which we've had many times in the past, we've had seasons disrupted. A couple of years ago, we had the hurricane down in Houston that disrupted the beginning of the season for a lot of our sports. We work through that. We'll work with the district. We'll work with our schools to navigate that and get through that situation as well.
So flexibility, again, we do not have the 2 game a week. If you can possibly make up those games, we look to make them up. And we move forward and we go on. The playoff dates are set. The calendar dates are set on the TAPS calendar, www.taps.biz. Click on that word calendar and it'll take you there and scroll across. You'll see who's playing when and where. We do need your updates in rank 1. Very, very important to us that we get the updates in rank 1. Just to make sure that you get your calendar in there and your schedule in there and then your scores. So I think one of the things that Will in our office has done a good job over the last couple of years, he does check the scores. He does check your deal. Make sure that schedule is turned to public. I think that's correct. I'm using the correct terminology. So make sure not only do you get it in rank 1, but Steve, make sure you turn it in public and keep those scores up to date so you're not trying to catch up at the end of time.
That's right, and district presidents and also peer pressure. Let them know if they're not doing it. Everybody needs to keep up with their scores. And again, at the office level, we're going to try to do what we can, but we do need them at the district level to really support us on that.
Volleyball 2021, it's here, folks. We're so excited to be able to have it come back. We're excited to be moving towards our championships. www.taps.biz. Jump on the website if you need assistance. Our phone number, 254-947-9268, and our email, info@taps.biz, info@taps.biz. If you have questions, please reach out to us. I don't see any other questions that have come up. We appreciate you joining us here today. So, John, take us on out of here.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Robert, Steve, and Will for this presentation today. Folks, once again, this webinar will be made available to you later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. That recording link will be sent to you on the email you used to register. If you think of another question, please let us know. Call us at the office or send us an email. And you folks enjoy the rest of your day.